Hi friends, it's Chrissy and this is Artist Confessional. Today we are going to look at a rejection letter turned great, where Kyle and I got turned down for one opportunity but then presented with a new one. Dear Chrissy and Kyle, I hope this email finds you well. Thank you so much for your submission to the Mississauga Festival of Trees installation program. We had an overwhelming number of applications, and at this time, we decided to go with other installation proposals. Thank you again for the time you spent creating such a fabulous proposal. We truly had a difficult time choosing which applications to go with. While your proposal was not accepted to the tree installation program, we are very impressed with the proposal, and we think the proposal can be realized as part of a future programs at Creative Hub. If you're interested in moving forward with this, please let us know. Have a wonderful week. Best, the MFT Installation Committee. So even though we got rejected, we still got invited to an equally cool exhibition, and we created a new large pop-up, and that's what we're going to show you today.
What are the secrets of studio practice? I want to know all your good and bad habits. How do you make art like a pro? There's so many ways to do so. Stick around, cause you'll find out on Artist Confessionals.
Artist Confessionals.
Artist Confessionals with sparkboxstudio.
Obviously, we were hoping that we would get in, and clearly we didn't. So that's a bummer, but it led to a totally different project that we were not expecting at all, and that was the Creative Hub's In Situ project. In Situ is one of their inaugural festivals. It was actually the launching pad to this organization becoming the creative space that it is now, which it was really amazing to be asked to participate in such an important festival. It's a multi-arts festival, so there's visual artists, performing artists, musicians, dancers, like photography, sculpture, installation, tons, literally tons and tons of art. It was overwhelming the amount of art that was in this space. I commend the curatorial team because I can't even imagine the organization of all of these different projects. If you want to learn more about the Creative Hub and the events that they do and the staff and how you can support or attend or apply yourself, I'll make sure that there's links to all of their programming and website below so you can check it out for yourself. For the project, we worked closely in collaboration with Joe and the team at Creative Hub to select 4 moments in the history of the small arm building. We looked at its contributions to World War II, its strangely clouded in mystery time with the hydro company, Canada Hydro. We also looked at its moment of abandonment, where teens came and played basketball and broke into this space. And then its rejuvenation, so its reabsorption into the Mississauga community to become a creative hub, a creative space.
Collaborations of this nature don't always start off clear. They take a bit of back and forth until you refine that idea. And our big broad stroke idea was what Chrissy said. And we kind of begun to narrow that down. Well, what does that exactly look like? It's great to say that it had history with hydro or with the war or it was abandoned, but like, what does any of that mean? Joe put together a really great image list from whatever history that the Creative Hub 1352 had and piled it together in a zip file and let us use that. We, on our end, hunted for any sort of like thing we could tie to the Creative Hub via Google or internet sleuthing. And we begun to build mood boards. You know, this is the mood board for this space, this is the mood board for that space, and here's just the reference library that we're working with. Now, with our narratives decided, it's up to us to figure out how best to represent what happens in each of these quadrants. For Chrissy and I think in this project it is important that we try to accurately represent what's happening as best as possible, but maybe not 100%. Like if its accuracy is like on a scale, maybe we're aiming for about 80%. I do think that it needs to have a bit of like fantasy and a bit of whimsicalness that the reality of it doesn't have, such as the story of kids breaking in and playing basketball. The reality of that versus the storybook version of that, those are very different scenes. So we try our best to take those things and do them justice. Let's talk about the format of our carousel book. Now, a traditional storybook is left to right, pages flip open. This one opens in a different, particularly interesting way. It opens in a round. I thought this was an interesting way to present this, and I think that it worked out really well. And the reason why we suggested this format as opposed to that traditional book was due to some of the other projects that Chrissy and I have been working on in other land. And part of that is we were really having a difficult time with the scale of pop-up books and the materiality of paper once you start getting into sizes like 2 foot by 2 foot. And this book happened to offer a lot of 90-degree parallel surfaces, which makes constructing pop-ups really easy. Let's scratch that. They make it more straightforward. There's less complex math, like they're still really crazy, but instead of having to deal with a lot of angles, which is what we've been dealing with in these other projects, which has been causing a lot of headache, we decided to take an easier route with the construction of the mechanisms being based upon 90-degree walls. And each one of these quadrants gave us 2 walls and a floor to work off, which makes pop-up mechanism construction really, really easy. It's still really complex, so moderate. It makes it really, really moderate. Our final book size is 26 inches by 16 inches, which then expands and carousels out to something about 58 inches across and 16 inches tall. So pretty substantial actually once it all opens up. The nature of something like this doesn't start here. It begins in a little tiny scale. We begin with a little tiny model. Like, we're not printing out an exact person at this point and cutting them out. We're just cutting out an oval shape of like cardboard or stock paper and just trying to see if that shape fits. The work for this project begins in Photoshop, where we work at an actual 1-to-1 scale. It's when we go to the printer and we just set it to 25% and then we print it out and then we assemble it. And that's how we make a 1-to-4 scale model of the book. And that's how we're ensuring that at the end, the files and what we're preparing is going to be accurate for like just whatever it is we're going to do. We're also trying to take all the reference images that we've been acquiring and translate them into drawings and into assets that we can assemble into the pop-out templates and shapes that we're constructing in Photoshop at that 1-to-1 actual scale. And we'll refine the shape and then we'll print that out and then we'll reassemble all of those things into pretty much like our first good prototype. And that prototype is where we test everything at that 1-to-4 scale model to see like, oh, is it looking correctly when the book opens? How do those characters feel? Do we need to make alterations? It's now when we do all that finicky stuff, because making alterations at the 1-to-1 scale is costly and not really practical. One of my favorite tools for the scale model version of the mockup is to superimpose a grid across the entire model itself. This grid relates exactly to the same grid that I have up in Photoshop, so that anything that we do in the model, such as like attaching a piece of paper at some random angle to the wall and to the floor and like, oh, it works, great. That gives me like something to actually measure off of or to reference so that when we go to the Photoshop end of it, we can build it accurately to what we did in reality. This is something I have to come to grips with a little bit. As much as I want it to be this like really hyper precise math, which it can be, there is a part of it that is just blind faith, and using the grid model lets us kind of work both sides of that fence. We can work really mathematically, but we can also work really organically, where we're just putting stuff together, hoping for the best. Favorite part about the war space is the machinery. I got to draw this really cool stuff, and I was pretty skeptical when I first started drawing it because it's just black line art at first. It looked really weird and really flat and really unintelligible. But once color started coming in and then a little bit of shading and all of that kind of flat patterning started to get modulated in space, like it actually is one of my favorite drawings of the entire book. Our Hydrospace has the best color palette. Of all four, this is my favorite. I don't know what it is about this red, but I love it. I love this red so much, and I love how it feels. And I don't know, I can't remember if it was totally intentional that we chose this color for Hydro. I think it was, because Hydro 1 in Canada has like a red color palette, and I think we tried to at least reference a little bit there. Our abandoned space is the weird make-believe space where all these kids dropped in and played basketball. And I think the part about this that I liked is this idea of these children like rappelling. I know they're not like rappelling like Batman through like a skylight, but that's how I envision that in my brain. And I think that's how I'm always going to remember that story. Remember, it's 80% representation, 20% fiction. The abandoned scene had this really interesting feature where we got to make it really feels like a school diorama. And that's because of these like rafter bits at the top that we figured out that they could bend inward into the book as the book closed, and then like they could pop back out. But like they made that like really theater stagey diorama feel. And I thought it was just kind of neat that we got to do that. The in situ panel or quadrant, it's funny because this references a previous event that happened that references previous events that happened. I think this is the most meta panel of all four of them. So for example, like it's these we're illustrating these dancers who are making a representation of breaking into the space in the abandoned scene. I don't know, it has this real weird onion thing to it. I kind of like it. What was a lovely change of pace from the previous pop-up project that we had just completed was that this one was of a scale that we got to use strictly paper. We did use Gatorboard for the structure of the book. In our other pop-ups, they had been at such a size that we had to actually make panels or support objects for them out of other thinner Gatorboard, and that causes a lot of other hiccups and problems, and I was really glad that it wasn't present in this project. Chrissy and I went with a two-tone color palette where we tried to assign a different color to each of the eras of the building because we thought that that was a great way to delineate the different narratives. We tried to associate those colors with the space. For the wartime, obviously brown. Hydro was the red color. The abandoned part was this kind of green tone, greens and blues. It felt like a little bit abandoned. And then the in situ one has these creams and blues. Part about bringing this project to life was infusing it with these stories. And a lot of these stories are not just a single individual, they're a collectivified experience. And sometimes we try to hide little Easter eggs into these kinds of projects. An example of these Easter eggs that we hide is this little Foresight magazine. This was an actual magazine that the Small Arms Building published, and when Joe gave us all of that wonderful reference images, there were some pictures of this, like, I guess it's a newspaper or newsletter? I don't really know what you would classify. It looks like a newspaper to me.
Over the course of the 15 or so years that Kyle and I have been running Sparkbox, we have had so many different people live and stay and work and learn in our shop, and it always felt like we had this very far-reaching global community, which we definitely do. But since closing the residency, it's not that the community's been lost, we still talk to all of those people, but it doesn't feel as connected to us on an ongoing, all the time basis like the residency did. So something that we're trying to do more is take our work and the stuff that we create and bring it outside of our space into different communities, like the people that stayed with us did, where they brought their work and their practice into our space and our community. In a recent video that John Green put out about the newest movie that he's a part of, Turtles All the Way Down, he talks about the gift that the art is to a community, but then also the gift that the community can give back to the art and the artist. He also mentions in that sometimes there can be a bit of a breakdown in that exchange, and a beautiful artistic gift can be kind of squashed if it's not received well by the community. And I can say that in our experience with this particular project, we did not experience that breakdown. Opening this Carousel book for the first time at the Creative Hub with the community members that participated in creating the In Situ event was just like the best experience an artist could ask for. All of those Easter eggs that Kyle was mentioning were seen by those members, and they were like pointing them out and getting really excited about noticing the care and detail that we put into this piece. We are so happy with how this turned out, and we always love sharing these projects with you. We hope that you'll join us again on the next one. Be sure to like, subscribe, all the things below. Join us on Patreon if you have the capacity, and we will talk to you soon.
What are the secrets of studio